I'm Alex Hall. I'm a lecturer in the Classical Studies program in the Department of World Languages and Cultures, and one of the classes that I teach is Classical Studies 273, which has an online section that we offer during the summer.
Hi, I'm Ritushree Chatterjee. I work as an instructional designer at Engineering LS Online Learning, and I was the assigned instructional designer to Dr. Hall for his course CLST 273, Greek and Roman Mythology, and we collaborated on developing this online course.
It was really sort of two problems in one, though both of them were related to the fact that one of the things that I needed the students to get out of the course as part of the course outcomes was not just a sort of knowledge of the facts of mythology that they could get just by reading and listening to lectures, but also a practical understanding of how to interpret mythology. And that's really a skill more than it is a body of knowledge, a body of fact. And so when I teach this course face-to-face, I have a number of different methods that I use to get them to practice this skill, writing papers, having discussions, and these are things that just wouldn't have been practical to do in an online environment. And so I was interested, first of all, in some way that I could get them to practice the skill. But I was interested, second of all, in them doing it in a way where I could provide feedback, where I could provide comments, and where it was not going to be just an absolute logistical impossibility to do those things. Because of course, when I'm in a classroom, I can answer questions and so forth and do it off the cuff, and it takes much less time. Whereas if all of them were writing 2 or 3 page papers every week, that would have been a serious problem, especially with a course as large as this one is. And so I was looking for some opportunity to provide feedback, and some way of doing it that would be logistically practical at scale. And I wasn't sure if that was going to be possible, honestly, until Rita suggested maybe ThinkSpace would be a way that we could do that. So
when we first met Dr. Hall, I had an instructor, Dr. Hall, who was a novice online instructor, so that was one direction to work with, of transitioning a faculty from a face-to-face environment to online. And the second was all that he talked about, like how to create an experience for the online students that wouldn't overwhelm them, confuse them, and also logistically, for him to implement it should be logistically possible. So, and then when we started talking about the course, he talked about how he would go about doing the assessments in a face-to-face environment. And then I got to know most of the things, at least the writing pieces, were kind of broken down into, or could be possibly broken down into steps. And that was the first instant that I thought about ThinkSpace. Because when I learned about ThinkSpace, that was the main fascinating thing, that given a problem, any problem that you think can be broken down into a series of steps, and it's kind of mixed with some degree of self-learning, where the instructor is kind of the facilitator, not necessarily is actually giving the instructions of how to go about doing things. So those things made me think of ThinkSpace, and then we worked on that, and we contacted Kajal. That's been awesome help. So, and that's how it was. That was it. It all happened basically. First thing that attracted me to ThinkSpace was a problem could be broken down into series of steps, and that idea kind of matched, if I can say that, with what Dr. Hall had in mind for his written assessment, the interpretive writing assignments. That was the one thing. Secondly, I think the interface, not interface, let me talk about the learning curve. The learning curve was pretty not that steep, so I knew that if we could work together, given the amount of time that we had, we could do it. We could develop a case and implement it. And third, I would say, is the support. I didn't want to go into a third-party vendor which I did not know how the support would be, if our questions would be answered on time, both as an instructor as well as the student questions. And I knew that this was housed in housed in iOS 10, if I can say, and then we had a good support structure built in already. So these are the three main things that had us going for ThinkSpace.
As Ritu's already sort of touched on some, the ability not just to sort of go through a problem in a phase step-by-step fashion, but especially the carry forward feature where students could enter something, and then when they move on to the next step, they could have what they'd already written there to compare to something that an expert had written, to use sort of smaller pieces of fact to compose something a little bit larger, which is exactly the kind of sort of step-by-step feedback that I really wanted them to be able to have to master these processes. The other big one that has been just sort of a joy for me in the course of using ThinkSpace has been the ability to the comment library. And so oftentimes when students are going through these processes, different students will encounter the same issue over and over again. And so having the comment library on ThinkSpace, where instead of, I don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, I don't have to rewrite, the seasons are a natural phenomenon and not a human institution. You'd be thinking about a human institution. I can just have that comment saved and very easily click it out and comment it out for each of the 20 or 30 students who need to be reminded of that. Which was, like I said, a huge logistical boon for me, to be able to provide comments that I think and hope are meaningful comments for the students, in a time frame that was not impossible for me to do. And so the comment library, and the carry forward option, and just the sort of, as Ritu's been saying, the phased structure of the whole thing, to have the students think about the process as a process.
And one more thing, I should add, is the scalability, because that was another factor that went into the favor of ThinkSpace. I think in the first iteration of the course, we had about 30 odd students.
Yeah, we had 35.
35, and then we knew that it would go up in the next semester, because that was one of the intents.
That was one of the intents, and it has this. In 2016 it was 35, in 2017 it was capped at 70, and I think we've got 68, 67 right now. So,
wow. So we really needed something that will save him a lot of time grading those written assignments and papers and all of those things. So this kind of helped a lot in that respect as well.
Enormously. Enormously. It was a little bit of a challenge, and I think that some of that may have been just because, although this was a sort of step-by-step process, when you're doing more like a humanistic form of analysis versus something that you might do in the sciences or something mathematical, it's very difficult oftentimes to sort of break things down into steps that are small enough to be able to explain them to the students one at a time. Oftentimes, even if it is a step-by-step process, you're doing a lot of the steps at the same time once you know how to do it. And so a real challenge for me in the course of designing these was to try and do that work as someone who's been doing them for so long, and so much of the thinking is automatic for me, was to really sort of try and break that down into the smallest number of the smallest scale of pieces, such that the students could go through them one at a time and not have to be doing them all simultaneously. And sort of an added challenge of that is that in some ways I had to start over from scratch in how I was thinking about doing this, because there are some ways in which it's just not possible to break this thing, to break these kinds of procedures down to the way experts do them, down to these sorts of very small quanta of work. And so having to kind of reimagine the process in a way that would be as true to the expert version of the process as possible, while still being something that the students who had never done this before would be able to take step by step and piece by piece. So that was, on my side of the process, that was sort of the starting point, and I think in some ways the biggest challenge.
Yeah. So he did all the hard work. about creating the blueprint, if I can say that. So, and what we did was we created a document, and we chunked it into what cases we needed and what exact requirements we needed, and what conditions. We didn't think about how we will operationalize those in ThinkSpace, but I wanted him to at least jot down everything that he wanted, whether he wants students to write an answer, whether he wants students to have have to answer or they cannot proceed ahead, things like that, small things like that. And since both of us had a demo of ThinkSpace, uh, Alex was pretty much aware of the kind of things, some of the things that he could do or we could not. So those was kind of a requirement document that we made. So that was a blueprint for me to go ahead and develop that case in ThinkSpace. And then we worked together back and forth what could be done. If we were stuck, we would email you. Most likely we have emailed you, or we have troubled the support chat a number of times. This is not working. We came across many bugs that even they were not aware. So it was a nice collaborative process, I would say.
So how long did it take you to come up with the final version?
Quite short of time.
I think it took a couple of months. Maybe
I thought a month.
maybe a month to get the blueprint going,
Yeah.
and then another month to sort of turn the blueprint into something they could walk into.
And then we did some testing on our own so that everything was in place and working. So about 2 months, I would say.
Yeah.
And this is along with developing the rest of the
Yes,
course. This was
yes,
not
indeed.
just the piece.
Writing
It was
the
online
quizzes,
courses.
recording videos.
Yes.
Yes.
So this was not just the piece in the online course. So.
Yeah, and I remember you tried various tools. You wanted to use the observation list first, and then you simplified it.
There was a lot of permutation combinations going on to figure out what exactly fitted Dr. Hall's needs. And
I'm hard to please. Is the problem.
So how has it worked out for you, and how do your students feel about it?
I think it's worked out very well. I was a little bit nervous, I have to say, even through the first offering of the course last summer. We were continuing to find a few bugs that needed to be ironed out. But based on not just what the students were actually producing in the context of the ThinkSpace activities themselves, but especially in terms of what I was seeing in the final papers that they turned into me, where they were responsible for writing a 2 to 3 page document where they were applying all of the skills that they've been learning in the course of all the ThinkSpace activities. They turned in very solid work, and so that says to me that they were learning the things that I wanted them to be learning. They were not experts yet by any means, but they had become comfortable with the use of the tools. They themselves, I think, were a little bit less sure about the tools. But again, based on what they produced, whether they knew why it was or not, they had learned something from doing the activities. And so that is, I hope that this semester's iteration of the course, the students will do as well or better. I expect that they will, just having come from the experience. So I'm pleased. Students may be less pleased, but
we also have another survey going in for this iteration of the course as well, where we have more specific questions about the use of ThinkSpace. I haven't compiled the entire results, but just scanned through, and I think we have had more positive comments than we did last time. So yeah.
That's certainly one of the things that I changed based on the evaluations last time, based on your advice, was I added an extra video to the online course where I walked students through one of the ThinkSpace activities and tried to, very specifically sort of field by field, and also tried to explain in more detail than I had before just what it is that they were doing and why they were doing that. And so I hope that has been helpful for them to keep a sense of just what the stakes were when they were coming to ThinkSpace every week.
Anybody who's wanting to adopt a new kind of teaching strategy or maybe has been doing things one way for the last 30, 40 years, I would encourage them to look at ThinkSpace, because it's definitely a different way of looking at learning altogether. It's not the same as what the instructor is saying, and the students are just passive absorbers of those information. So if you want to bring in more interactivity and engagement, I think, and rethink the way you teach your content, I think ThinkSpace is a good way to start doing that.
In terms of advice that I would offer people who are getting into ThinkSpace, I would say you need to, as I talked about before, you need to be able to sort of start. You need to be able to explain what you want the students to be doing in ThinkSpace down to a very sort of granular level, and oftentimes that's going to require you to be thinking about the process that you're trying to teach in a different way than you have before. Because again, you're not going to have, you may or may not have the opportunity to sort of walk students through one by one, step by step. The process itself needs to be simple and needs to be transparent, and that can be a challenge. And so I'd say be prepared for an intellectual challenge as you are building. This is not just a software challenge. It is an academic challenge. So get ready.